For over 4,500 years, one question about the Great Pyramid of Giza has remained stubbornly, maddeningly unanswered. Not how it was built, though that debate continues in its own right. Not why it was built, since that answer has long been settled. The question that has haunted archaeologists and captivated the public for over a century is simpler and stranger than either of those. Is there something still hidden inside it? Something nobody has ever seen? Something sealed away since the reign of a pharaoh whose own body has never been found? In April of this year, 3 completely independent teams of physicists, working with 3 separate types of detection technology, arrived at the same answer, publishing their findings in one of the most rigorously reviewed scientific journals in the world. There is a void inside the Great Pyramid. It is massive. It sits directly above one of the most important chambers ever built by human hands. And as of right now, nobody knows what, if anything, is inside it. To understand why this discovery matters as much as it does, you first have to understand exactly what the Great Pyramid actually is, not just as a tourist attraction or a symbol printed on postcards, but as a genuine engineering mystery that has never been fully solved, even after nearly 2 centuries of serious archaeological study. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built roughly 4,500 years ago, during the reign of the pharaoh Khufu, a ruler of Egypt's 4th dynasty who governed from approximately 2509 to 2483 BC. Standing originally at around 146 meters tall, though erosion and the loss of its outer casing stones have reduced that height slightly over the millennia, it held the title of tallest structure built by human hands for an almost unbroken span of nearly 4,000 years, a record unmatched by any other single building in human history until the construction of medieval European cathedrals and eventually modern skyscrapers. It's composed of more than 2.3 million individual stone blocks, some weighing several tons apiece, quarried, transported, and precisely assembled using construction methods that remain, even today, only partially understood and actively debated among engineers and archaeologists. It stands today as the last surviving structure among the original 7 wonders of the ancient world, the only one of that famous list still standing largely intact, a direct physical link to a civilization that flourished and eventually vanished long before most of the historical events people typically consider ancient history had even occurred. For most of the modern era of Egyptology, dating back to serious scientific investigation beginning in the 19th century, the internal structure of the Great Pyramid was believed to be relatively well understood and fully mapped. 3 primary chambers had been identified and thoroughly documented. The so-called subterranean chamber, carved directly into the bedrock beneath the pyramid's base, the Queen's Chamber, situated roughly midway up the structure's interior despite its name, which doesn't actually indicate it was built for a queen. And the King's Chamber, the pyramid's most architecturally significant interior space, housing an empty granite sarcophagus, and reached via the famous Grand Gallery, a soaring, meticulously constructed corbelled passage considered one of the finest examples of ancient engineering anywhere in the world. For generations, the working assumption among Egyptologists was that these 3 chambers represented the complete internal layout of the pyramid, that whatever secrets Khufu's monument held had already been fully uncovered, mapped, and studied. That assumption began to unravel in 2015, with the launch of an ambitious international research initiative called the Scan Pyramids Project, a collaboration bringing together Egyptian antiquities, authorities alongside physicists, engineers, and researchers from multiple countries, including notably Japan's Waseda University and several French research institutions. The project's central innovation wasn't a new excavation technique in the traditional archaeological sense, digging or drilling into the pyramid's ancient stonework. Instead, it relied on a genuinely clever application of particle physics called muon tomography, sometimes more simply called muography. To understand how this technique actually works, you need a basic grasp of what muons are in the first place. Muons are subatomic particles, similar to electrons but considerably heavier, that are constantly created when cosmic rays, high-energy particles arriving from deep space, collide with atoms in Earth's upper atmosphere. As a natural byproduct of this constant cosmic bombardment, a steady rain of muons continuously falls toward the Earth's surface, passing through virtually everything in their path, including, remarkably, the solid stone of a 200-foot-tall pyramid. Crucially, though, muons don't pass through solid rock and empty air at exactly the same rate. Denser material absorbs and blocks slightly more muons than open, empty space does. By placing specialized muon detectors at strategic locations around and even inside the pyramid, and carefully measuring exactly how many muons pass through different sections of the structure over extended periods of observation, researchers can essentially build a density map of the pyramid's interior, revealing hidden voids and cavities without ever needing to drill, cut, or physically disturb a single ancient stone. It's a technique originally developed for entirely different purposes, including monitoring the interior of active volcanoes and inspecting nuclear reactor cores, repurposed here for one of archaeology's oldest and most persistent unsolved mysteries. The first major payoff from this approach came in 2017, when the Scan Pyramids team announced the detection of a substantial void positioned directly above the Grand Gallery itself, a finding significant enough that it was published in the prestigious scientific journal Nature, one of the most rigorously peer-reviewed publications in the entire scientific world. That original 2017 finding suggested the void was roughly comparable in overall scale to the Grand Gallery, an enormous and architecturally sophisticated space in its own right, but at the time, researchers lacked the tools necessary to visually confirm the void's exact shape, precise dimensions, or its actual purpose within the pyramid's broader structure. It remained for years afterward a confirmed but essentially unexplored anomaly, a shadow on a density map rather than a fully understood physical space. The next major breakthrough arrived in March of 2023, when the same Scan Pyramids research team published a second significant finding, again in a highly credible peer-reviewed venue, this time in Nature Communications. This discovery involved a distinctly different space, a corridor measuring approximately 9 meters long by 2 meters wide, located just behind the pyramid's north face, hidden directly behind the distinctive chevron-shaped limestone blocks positioned above the pyramid's original main entrance. Having identified a probable gap between these blocks through a combination of radar and ultrasound imaging techniques, researchers made the decision to physically investigate the space directly, though using a method careful enough to avoid causing any damage whatsoever to the surrounding ancient stonework. They inserted an extraordinarily thin endoscopic camera, just 5 millimeters in diameter, developed specifically for this purpose by engineers at Waseda University in Japan, through a small existing gap in the stonework. For the first time in nearly 5,000 years, a camera, rather than a human eye, entered a space that had remained completely sealed and undisturbed since the pyramid's original construction. What that camera revealed was a corridor featuring a distinctive gabled vaulted ceiling, a construction style that researchers believe was likely intended to help redistribute and relieve the immense structural weight of the stone blocks positioned above the pyramid's main entrance, functioning essentially as an architectural safety measure built directly into the monument's design, rather than as a passageway leading somewhere else, or a chamber intended for any independent purpose of its own. The 2023 discovery, while genuinely remarkable in its own right, still left the much larger and more architecturally significant void first detected back in 2017, the one positioned directly above the Grand Gallery, essentially unresolved. Researchers knew it existed. They had a rough sense of its overall scale, but its precise dimensions, its exact shape, and any hint about its actual purpose remained frustratingly out of reach, limited by the resolution and interpretive capabilities of the specific detection technology available at that particular point in the project's development. This is precisely where this year's discovery enters the story, and why it represents such a genuinely significant leap forward compared to everything that came before it. According to research published in Nature in April of 2026, 3 completely independent teams of physicists, each employing a distinct and separate muon detection technology, arrived at converging, mutually reinforcing conclusions regarding the void positioned above the Grand Gallery. Having 3 separate research teams, using 3 genuinely different technical approaches, all confirm essentially the same underlying finding represents an unusually high standard of scientific verification, considerably more robust than relying on a single detection method or a single research group's interpretation of their own data. According to their combined published findings, the void measures at least 30 meters in length, a scale directly comparable to the Grand Gallery itself, one of the most architecturally sophisticated and structurally significant features found anywhere within the entire pyramid complex. Beyond simply confirming the void's existence and its considerable scale, researchers have also identified something potentially even more significant: a sealed stone door positioned at the end of a newly discovered interior corridor, a corridor that was reached and explored using a small robotic probe, specifically designed to navigate the tight, confined spaces involved without requiring any human presence or any physical damage to the surrounding structure. As of the most recent published reporting on this discovery, this sealed door has been located and identified, but has not yet been opened, and its exact contents, quite obviously, remain completely unknown. Egyptologist Zahi Hawass, one of the most prominent and internationally recognized figures in the entire field of Egyptology, formerly serving as Egypt's Minister of Antiquities, has publicly stated his belief that something genuinely important lies hidden behind this specific sealed door, and has indicated that plans are actively underway to open and formally reveal whatever lies beyond it sometime in 2026, a timeline that notably coincides with the highly anticipated opening of Egypt's new Grand Egyptian Museum, an enormous, purpose-built facility situated near the Giza pyramid complex itself, encompassing more than 100,000 square meters of exhibition space and housing thousands of artifacts, making it, by a considerable margin, the largest museum anywhere in the world dedicated entirely to a single ancient civilization. It's worth being genuinely careful and precise here about exactly what has and has not actually been confirmed as of this moment, because the honest, responsible answer involves considerably more uncertainty than more sensationalized coverage of this story sometimes implies. The void's existence, its impressive scale, and the presence of a sealed door at the end of an accessible interior corridor have all been documented and verified through peer-reviewed scientific publication, a genuinely high standard of evidence within the broader archaeological and scientific communities. What has decidedly not yet happened, based on all currently available reporting, is the actual physical opening of that sealed door, and any corresponding confirmation of whatever specifically lies immediately behind it. This means that, as of right now, everything regarding the void's actual purpose and its precise contents remains, quite genuinely, an open, unresolved question, one that active ongoing research is specifically working to answer, but which has not yet been definitively settled. Given that genuine uncertainty, it's worth walking through the range of serious, scientifically credible possibilities researchers have proposed for what this newly confirmed void might actually represent, because several distinctly different explanations remain entirely plausible based on current evidence. And honest reporting requires presenting that range of possibilities rather than simply picking the single most dramatic option and presenting it as settled fact. The most cautious and, in some ways, most probable explanation, based on comparable architectural precedents found elsewhere within the pyramid, involves the void serving some form of structural or construction-related purpose, rather than functioning as a previously unknown burial chamber. Salama Ikram, a respected Egyptologist affiliated with the American University in Cairo, has specifically suggested that the void's precise location directly above the Grand Gallery may connect meaningfully to exactly how that lower, more famous corridor was originally constructed. One particularly compelling theory involves the possibility that the newly discovered space functioned, at least during the pyramid's original construction process, as a ramp, a supporting structure specifically used to help ancient builders maneuver and position the massive granite beams that reinforce and support the ceiling of the king's chamber directly below. Under this particular interpretation, once the pyramid's construction had been fully completed and those enormous granite beams were successfully positioned, the ramp itself may have simply been left in place, either remaining entirely open as accessible empty space, or having been loosely filled in afterward with rubble and construction debris, rather than being carefully sealed for any specific ceremonial or protective purpose. A second related possibility echoes the interpretation already established regarding the smaller 2023 corridor discovery, that this considerably larger void, like its smaller counterpart near the pyramid's north face, was specifically engineered as a weight-relieving structure, a deliberate architectural feature built directly into the pyramid's design, specifically to help redistribute the enormous structural stress generated by the sheer, staggering weight of the stone positioned above and around the Grand Gallery. Ancient Egyptian builders demonstrated a genuinely sophisticated, empirically developed understanding of stress distribution and structural weight management throughout the pyramid's overall design, and multiple existing internal features, including the king's chamber's own so-called relieving chambers, positioned directly above its ceiling and specifically designed to protect the chamber below from the pyramid's tremendous overhead weight, already demonstrate this same general engineering principle being deliberately applied elsewhere within the exact same monument. The third possibility, considerably more dramatic and correspondingly more speculative than either of the two explanations already discussed, involves the tantalizing prospect that this newly confirmed void might represent, or might lead directly toward, an entirely unknown and previously undiscovered burial chamber, quite possibly even containing the actual physical remains of Khufu himself. This particular possibility carries genuine, substantial weight specifically because of a persistent, long-standing mystery that has puzzled Egyptologists for well over a century. Khufu's actual physical body has never been definitively found or conclusively identified anywhere. His granite sarcophagus, positioned prominently within the king's chamber, was already completely empty at the time it was first properly documented by modern archaeological investigation, and to this day, no other confirmed location for his actual mummified remains has ever been conclusively established anywhere else in Egypt. If this newly discovered void were to eventually lead toward or itself constitute a genuinely intact, previously undisturbed royal burial chamber, complete with funerary artifacts, ceremonial objects, or ideally the pharaoh's own preserved remains, Hawass himself has stated plainly that such a discovery would represent the single greatest archaeological find since Howard Carter's legendary 1922 discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, an event that remains, even a full century later, widely considered the single most famous and most significant archaeological discovery in the entire modern history of the field. It's genuinely important, in the interest of maintaining full honesty and appropriate scientific caution here, to note directly that this particular possibility, an intact, previously unknown royal burial chamber, remains, as of right now, considerably more speculative than either of the two more structurally focused explanations discussed above. Egyptologists have long understood and extensively documented that ancient Egyptian pyramids, generally speaking, were frequently looted and disturbed at various points throughout the intervening thousands of years since their original construction, sometimes within just a few generations of the reigning pharaoh's actual death and burial. The specific circumstances surrounding Khufu's own particular case, why his sarcophagus was already found completely empty, and where his actual remains might have ultimately ended up, whether through ancient looting and deliberate secondary reburial elsewhere, or some other historical circumstance entirely, remain fundamentally unresolved open questions within the broader field of Egyptology, regardless of whatever specifically turns out to be found within this newly confirmed void. What makes this particular moment in the ongoing story of the Great Pyramid genuinely remarkable, beyond simply the scale and technical sophistication of this one specific discovery, is the broader pattern it represents within an active, still unfolding archaeological research program. Just weeks after this April 2026 discovery regarding the Khufu Pyramid's Grand Gallery Void was formally published, the same broader Scan Pyramids Research Initiative announced yet another significant finding, this time concerning an entirely different structure, the Menkaure Pyramid, the smallest of the three primary pyramids that together make up the larger Giza complex. Researchers detected two previously unknown, structurally anomalous voids hidden directly behind the Menkaure Pyramid's distinctive polished granite casing stones, with one measuring approximately 1 meter in height by 1.5 meters in width, and the second measuring roughly 0.9 by 0.7 meters. Achieving this specific level of precise measurement accuracy required researchers to combine and cross-reference multiple independent scanning methods simultaneously, employing a specialized technique known as image fusion, essentially merging and cross-referencing all of the various collected measurement data together to definitively confirm both the genuine existence and the precise physical dimensions of these newly identified hidden spaces. Notably, researchers involved in this specific Menkaure discovery have suggested these particular voids may potentially hint at the presence of a previously unknown, undocumented entrance into the pyramid, an entirely distinct possibility from the structural or burial-related explanations currently being considered regarding the much larger void discovered within the neighboring Khufu pyramid. Taken together, these two distinct discoveries, one within the Khufu pyramid, the other within the neighboring Menkaure pyramid, both emerging from the exact same ongoing Scan Pyramids research initiative within the span of just a few weeks, strongly suggest that the internal architecture of Giza's pyramid complex remains considerably more intricate and considerably less completely understood than Egyptologists had confidently assumed for the vast majority of the 20th century. For the better part of 100 years, it was widely, confidently believed among professional Egyptologists that these massive stone monuments had been essentially fully mapped and thoroughly understood, their internal secrets long ago fully cataloged and resolved through generations of careful, painstaking archaeological research. The specific combination of muon-based tomography technology, careful multi-team scientific verification, and advanced non-invasive imaging methods now actively deployed by the Scan Pyramids project has effectively demonstrated, repeatedly and convincingly, that this long-standing, widely held assumption was simply genuinely incorrect. There's a broader, genuinely important point worth making here about exactly why this specific technological approach, muon tomography, applied directly to archaeological research, represents such a significant and consequential advancement for the entire field, extending well beyond this one specific discovery at Giza. Throughout the vast majority of the 20th century, archaeological investigation of enclosed structures like the pyramids necessarily required either direct physical excavation, involving actual drilling or cutting into ancient stonework, an approach that inevitably risks causing permanent, irreversible damage to structures whose fundamental historical and cultural value depends entirely on their continued physical preservation. Or, alternatively, researchers were forced to simply rely on external visual observation alone, a method obviously incapable of revealing anything genuinely hidden deep within a solid, opaque structure. Muon tomography represents a genuinely significant technological breakthrough because it successfully accomplishes something that would have seemed like pure science fiction to earlier generations of archaeologists. It allows researchers to accurately map and characterize completely hidden internal spaces without ever requiring any physical contact whatsoever with the ancient structure itself, entirely preserving the monument's structural and historical integrity while still yielding genuinely new, previously unknown, and scientifically verifiable information about its true internal architecture. This technological approach carries implications that extend considerably beyond just the Great Pyramid specifically, and researchers directly involved with the Scan Pyramids project have themselves noted this broader potential explicitly. The same fundamental non-invasive scanning methodology successfully used to identify these newly confirmed voids within both the Khufu and Menkaure pyramids could, in principle, be applied just as effectively to numerous other ancient structures located throughout Egypt, and indeed to comparable enclosed archaeological structures found anywhere else around the entire world, potentially revealing previously unknown hidden spaces within monuments that have already been extensively studied and confidently assumed to be fully understood for decades, or in some cases for well over a century. This suggests that the story of hidden discoveries within thoroughly studied ancient monuments may genuinely be just beginning, rather than representing some kind of final, conclusive chapter. In a field of study many people mistakenly assume has already been fully completed and resolved. Returning specifically to the Khufu Pyramid's newly confirmed Grand Gallery void, and to the currently unopened sealed door discovered at the far end of its associated interior corridor, it's worth spending a moment considering exactly what the practical, logistical process of actually opening that door and directly investigating whatever specifically lies immediately beyond it will likely require going forward. Zahi Hawass has specifically emphasized in public statements regarding this ongoing investigation that any physical exploration of this particular space will necessarily continue to rely heavily on specialized robotic technology, rather than involving any form of direct human physical entry. This particular approach reflects two entirely separate, equally serious practical concerns that researchers must carefully navigate. First, and most straightforwardly, the specific space in question is simply too physically cramped and constrained to safely and practically accommodate direct human entry at all, given the confined dimensions the Scan Pyramids team has already documented and confirmed. Second, and arguably even more scientifically significant, any organic materials that might potentially exist within this space, ranging from ancient wooden furniture or ceremonial funerary objects to, quite possibly, actual human remains, would be extraordinarily vulnerable to rapid degradation upon any sudden, uncontrolled exposure to modern atmospheric conditions, oxygen levels, humidity, and ambient temperature. A carefully controlled robotic investigation specifically allows researchers the ability to first visually document and potentially begin sampling the space's contents under strictly controlled environmental conditions, thereby preserving the maximum possible amount of genuinely valuable historical and scientific information before undertaking any further, more invasive stage of physical investigation. It's also worth directly and honestly acknowledging a broader, entirely legitimate pattern worth understanding here, one that responsible science journalism owes its audience in the specific context of ongoing Egyptian archaeological announcements more generally. Egypt's government has a well-documented, long-standing history of actively and strategically publicizing significant archaeological discoveries, specifically in order to help generate and sustain public and international interest in tourism, a critically important source of foreign currency revenue and domestic employment for the broader Egyptian economy. This established pattern doesn't inherently mean that any particular archaeological claim made by Egyptian officials is scientifically inaccurate or somehow overstated. In this specific case, the underlying core discovery has been independently verified through legitimate, rigorous peer review and formal publication. In Nature, one of the most respected and demanding scientific journals in the entire world, a genuinely high bar for scientific credibility that meaningfully distinguishes this particular finding from countless other, considerably less rigorously supported claims regarding ancient Egyptian monuments that circulate widely online. But it does mean that the specific, carefully chosen timing of Hawass's public announcements regarding a planned, formal 2026 opening and revelation, deliberately coinciding with the concurrent, high-profile opening of the new Grand Egyptian Museum, likely reflects at least some degree of conscious, deliberate strategic planning around maximizing public attention and anticipation, entirely independent of, and separate from, the pyramid's own underlying archaeological timeline or the pace of the ongoing scientific investigation itself. So, given everything currently known and everything that specifically still remains genuinely unknown, where does this fascinating, still unfolding story actually stand as of right now? A massive, previously unknown void, comparable in overall scale to the Grand Gallery, one of the pyramid's single most architecturally significant interior features, has been definitively confirmed to exist directly above that same gallery, verified independently by 3 completely separate research teams employing 3 genuinely distinct detection technologies, and formally published through legitimate, rigorous peer review in one of the world's most respected and demanding scientific journals. A sealed stone door has been successfully located at the far end of an accessible interior corridor connected to this newly confirmed void, though, as of the most recent available reporting, that door has not yet actually been opened, and consequently, Its precise contents remain, quite genuinely, completely unknown to researchers or to the public. Multiple entirely plausible, scientifically serious explanations remain firmly on the table simultaneously, ranging from a straightforward ancient construction ramp to a deliberately engineered weight-relieving structural feature to, at the more speculative and considerably more dramatic end of the spectrum, a genuinely previously undiscovered royal burial chamber that could conceivably contain the long-missing remains of Khufu himself, a pharaoh whose empty sarcophagus has puzzled and frustrated professional Egyptologists for well over 100 years of dedicated, sustained scholarly research. Egyptian officials have publicly stated their clear intention to open the sealed door and to formally reveal whatever specifically lies beyond it sometime later in 2026, though the exact scheduled date for that anticipated revelation had not yet been officially, publicly announced as of the most recent available reporting. What makes this story genuinely worth following closely, beyond simply the inherent drama and mystery of a sealed door that has remained completely untouched for well over 4,000 years, is what it fundamentally represents about the actual current state of Egyptological research and understanding more broadly, as opposed to the popular, widespread misconception that a monument is thoroughly studied, documented, and photographed as the Great Pyramid must, by this point, hold no remaining genuine secrets left to discover. For the vast majority of the 20th century, that specific assumption was widely, confidently held as essentially settled fact among professional archaeologists and educated laypeople alike. The steady, cumulative progression of scan pyramids discoveries, beginning with the initial 2017 detection, continuing through the carefully documented 2023 corridor exploration, and culminating, at least for now, in this year's definitive, triple-verified confirmation of a massive void directly above the Grand Gallery, has demonstrated repeatedly, and with genuinely rigorous scientific backing, that this long-standing assumption was simply, demonstrably incorrect. Whatever specifically turns out to lie behind that sealed stone door, whenever Egyptian authorities and the Scan Pyramids research team finally do manage to definitively open it and formally reveal its actual contents to the wider world, one thing about this entire unfolding story already seems genuinely, undeniably clear, regardless of that eventual outcome. The Great Pyramid of Giza, a monument that has already stood as a fixed, unchanging point on the Egyptian horizon for well over 4,500 years, that has already been climbed, measured, mapped, photographed, and intensively studied by literally thousands of dedicated researchers across nearly 2 full centuries of serious, sustained scientific investigation, still retains the genuine capacity to surprise us. It still holds spaces that no living human being has ever laid eyes on. It still contains questions that our absolute best, most sophisticated available science can currently detect and confirm the outer bounds of, without yet being able to fully answer or resolve. In an era when it can sometimes feel as though virtually everything on this planet has already been thoroughly mapped, cataloged, and definitively explained, the largest and most extensively studied pyramid ever constructed by ancient hands is, right now, actively reminding us, in the most vivid and dramatic way imaginable, that this comfortable, confident assumption was never actually fully true.